If you didn't know already, I had my start in art doing more painterly style anime drawings, which makes sense considering my very early art inspirations were people like Cynics, Ahmed Alduri, Jetty Jet, Ruben Lara, Sakura to name a few, and some American illustrators like Salt Tepper, Norman Rockwell, and J.C. Linedecker. I really enjoyed the look and style of painterly paintings, so naturally I adopted that style when it came to drawing cute anime girls, or at least the process of it, but because of this I sucked at line art. I didn't really know how to go from sketch to line art, and all the YouTube videos on how to make good line art really didn't help me. In the end, I just kinda stuck with the more painterly stuff. But later on in my art journey, I really wanted to learn how to do line art. The simplicity and beauty of great line art was something I always loved looking at. Artists such as Modare, Ixi, and literally everybody on Pixiv. How could something so simple be so difficult for me to do? Well, I set myself on a path to explore just that. I studied, experimented, and practiced, and I learned a lot about line art. So now I want to share 3 tips that can instantly skyrocket your line art ability. These 3 things really helped me out, and I think it can do the same for anybody struggling with line art. To start off, these 3 tips aren't anything mechanical or physical you can do. For example, some people may say bump up your stabilization for smoother lines, or go really slow and zoom in super far when drawing. Or maybe they even recommend a brush to use for line art. These tips have been exhausted to death, and I personally didn't find them any useful at all when trying to learn. The amount of times I've seen people throw around the term line weight is astounding. Line weight is important, don't get me wrong, but saying something like varied line weight makes your line art better is like saying more colors make your paintings prettier. In a way, it's true in some circumstances, but there's more to the story than just more equals better. But I'm getting off track. I wanted to share some tips that I don't see as often. These 3 tips more so have to do with the mentality or mindset I find helpful when doing line art. Let's go on to tip number 1. Line economy. It's a basic mindset to have when doing line art, but I think it's immensely helpful. Firstly, what is line economy? Line economy is the number of lines used to convey a single idea, something like a budget. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to line a sketch on a piece of paper, but the only pen that you have is almost out of ink. So you need to use the least amount of lines possible to convey what you're trying to draw. You may be asking, what's the purpose of this? Well, it has multiple uses. Doing this will force you to make clean, cut decisions when putting down a line. Instead of unconfidently doing chicken scratches or train tracking, it'll clear up your line art from unnecessary lines and a bunch of other upsides. Having a budget on the amount of lines you make clears your head and forces you to look at the big picture instead of stuck on the small details. I'm not saying you can only use 100 lines to finish your drawing, but what I am saying is that you should try to keep this philosophy in mind whenever you're feeling overwhelmed with zooming in and drawing the tiniest, smallest details. Tip number 2 is perfection in imperfection. There is no doubt in my mind that you have done this before. Do you see this? This is you, drawing the same line over and over and over again. You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same action over again and expecting different results. Nah, I'm just joking. There's nothing really wrong with undoing repeatedly, but actually, does anybody like to hit Ctrl-Z after every imperfect line? It took me a long time to realize that perfect line art shouldn't exist. The little quirks and imperfections in line art are what make it look so natural. Similar to how a traditional painter's brush comes in contact with the paint and canvas, giving it random texture and life to it. Line art is the same thing, and sometimes we forget this, since in digital art, we have brushes that stamp perfect images in succession instead of actual physical media that are truly random in its application. So line art done digitally opposed to traditionally will always look a little bit flat and inorganic because of this. I think it's best to embrace shaky lines, having line breaks, or even overshooting lines to give it more of that authentic look to it. And finally, the 3rd tip. This is the tip that made me really see the improvement from my past line art drawings to my current ones. And that tip is using the sketch as a reference. When novice artists try to do line art, they commonly trace their sketches. While there's nothing inherently wrong with tracing your sketch, it will produce lifeless line art. Surely you've been in a situation where your sketch looks 100 times better than your line art, and that's because when you trace a drawing, in this case your sketch, the energy and fluidity within it gets lost in translation. So to combat this, use your sketch as a reference rather than trace it. You don't have to go as far as putting your sketch on the side and doing line art without it. All you need to do is have the mindset of creating new lines inspired by your sketch. This will keep the intent of the sketch while creating new energetic lines. And that's it. With these 3 tips in mind, I assure you that your line art will be at least 1.5 times better than it was before you watched this video. It really does take time to fully take in these tips I provided, and wait a minute, the video's not done yet. Wait, there's a little bit more to the video. Wait a minute. Does this mean it's a bonus tip? Alright, I'm gonna share the super secret line art technique that changed my entire worldview. We are talking higher dimensional thinking. I will literally break your reality. Ready? The secret line art technique is nothing. Okay, just kidding. The real secret line art technique is doing line art after coloring, after rendering. Switch up where you do the line art in your process. Do line art once after you do the sketch and then again after you color. Don't be confined to the idea of only sticking to this sort of static workflow of sketch to line art to base color to shading, etc, etc, etc. Break the mold and go backwards from your traditional workflow. I found that doing line art after I do the cool painting and rendering stuff creates a really nice effect. Less dull, lifeless, and static. This is because when painting, you're often pulling and pushing shapes in the negative and positive space. You're restraining yourself from changing and manipulating the silhouette by staying within the lines you made. Don't be afraid to break open your perfect line art. You can always just make a new layer and draw over it. And for real now, that's it. I hope these tips helped out at least one person, and if you liked it, please like and comment. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. And yeah, still not good with outros, so see ya. Oh yeah, and follow me on Twitter too. Okay, bye.